On the morning of May 8th, 1960-5, a man named Karl Robert Dish mysteriously disappeared while working at Byrd Station in Antarctica. A search party was quickly assembled afterward, but aside from a set of footprints on the snow, they could find no trace of him. 60 years later, various theories and conjectures are continuously put forward, yet they all share one common problem. They all have various flaws. So, what exactly did Dish experience, and where did he go? Let us discuss today's topic: the mysterious disappearance at the Antarctic Research Station. This haunting story, which has persisted for more than 60 years, took place on a cold, dark morning in 1960-5. 1 year earlier, Karl Robert Dish, a 20-6-year-old man from Monroe, Wisconsin, joined the working team at Byrd Laboratory as an ionospheric physicist. As part of his job responsibilities, he was required to join a research team in Antarctica. This was arguably a difficult task, which he readily agreed to, and was soon assigned to Byrd Station. The station is located nearly 960 kilometers from the geographical South Pole. For the next 6 months, he spent most of his time working at the Central Radio Propagation Laboratory. His work required him to be exposed for long periods in the radio noise room, a small hut located a little more than 2 kilometers northwest of the main building complex. The location was quite strategic, and despite the distance, the two buildings were connected by a hand-guide rope. In bad weather or low visibility, this rope helped researchers orient themselves. Dish himself had walked this route dozens of times and was very familiar with the terrain and the related navigation procedures. However, on the morning of May 8th, 1960-5, he set out from the radio noise room for the last time, walked into the wilderness, and was never seen again. Dish left the small hut at 9:15 in the morning, during nautical twilight, and headed toward the main building complex. It was very windy, but he was dressed in a full set of Antarctic gear, which was theoretically supposed to protect him from the severe cold. The temperature at the time was already down to -40-2 degrees Celsius. The journey should not have taken more than half an hour to complete. However, by 10 o'clock in the morning, Dish had not arrived at his destination, and his colleagues became very concerned. A vehicle search team was assembled and began searching along his planned route, but they found no trace of Dish. Further investigation revealed a set of footprints next to the radio noise room. These footprints were discovered at 11:30. They started at the bottom of the ladder next to the hut, but they did not extend south along the hand-guide rope as expected, instead heading west towards the skiway, the area where air cargo was landed. Colleagues tracked his footprints downwind for about 6 kilometers, all the way to the southwest corner of the station's perimeter. At this point, the vehicles had reached their limit and had to return to base to refuel. At the time, his colleagues noticed that Dish's footprints looked purposeful, with an even long stride, not the hesitant, stop-and-go pattern one might expect. This suggested that wherever Dish was going, he was moving with intent, rather than in the state people would assume when lost or confused. After refueling the vehicles, the search party returned to the corner of the skiway. Unfortunately, 3 hours of searching in the area yielded nothing, as the strong winds had by then blown snow over the rest of the footprints, causing them to disappear. Not only that, but the 30-knot winds also covered the search party's tracks, making a safe return extremely difficult. They finally returned to base at 6:15 that evening. By 7 o'clock that night, they conducted a massive search of the supply line, the emergency runway, and the fuel depot, but all was in vain. About an hour later, colleagues linked arms to form a human chain and searched the area from the base all the way to the skiway, where Dish's footprints had disappeared, but still found nothing. Despite the bad weather and unlimited visibility, the station turned on its searchlights and fired a flare every 30 minutes, until visibility later became too poor and these measures were deemed ineffective, and colleagues reluctantly paused the day's search operations. The next day, a third vehicle search team was organized to search an area 1 kilometer wide and 14 kilometers long, from the base to the skiway and beyond. although intact footprints extending southwest were occasionally found. They suddenly disappeared again about 6 kilometers southwest of the radio noise room. On May 10th, 2 days after the disappearance, a large minus-scale search began at 7:40 in the morning. This search consisted of an 8-person team, 2 vehicles, a supply channel, and fuel. The search started at the main building complex, proceeded south, and conducted vertical searches in the east and west directions. The search team marked their route with flags, searching all the way to 19 kilometers outside the station area, but found nothing. On May 12th, the northeast and southeast sectors of Byrd Station were searched. The weather conditions were good at the time, but the darkness severely limited their field of vision. Over the next 2 days, visibility worsened further, making searching impossible due to strong winds and heavy fog. By May 14th, 90-1 square kilometers had been searched. But despite such a massive search effort, Karl Robert Dish was never seen again. Given the time of his disappearance and the severe weather conditions he likely encountered, it was speculated that he had died. A memorial service was held for him by friends and family in his hometown of Monroe. His colleagues also held a memorial service at Byrd Station. This marked the beginning of a mystery, a tragic mystery that has remained unsolved for the past 60 years and continues to baffle people today. The questions posed back then still exist. Why did Dish deviate from his usual route? Was it his mistake, or intentional? How could a healthy, experienced, and intelligent person vanish without a trace? As time went by, many theories emerged attempting to explain the incident. Some theories are relatively straightforward, while others require a more open mind. But all these hypothesized explanations have one thing in common, as we mentioned at the start. They all have flaws. Perhaps the most popular theory about Dish's disappearance is the weather conditions mentioned earlier. It is conceivable that the combination of blizzard conditions, low visibility, and the monotonous white landscape led him to become disoriented as he left the radio noise room, causing him to walk west instead of south towards the main building complex. Once he had gone a short distance, it would have been difficult to regain his bearings. However, Dish had walked this short route more than 20 times before, and given his experience, it is unlikely that he would have missed the hand-guide rope and deviated so far from his path after descending the ladder next to the radio noise room. That rope was right in front of him, and even with low visibility, he could not have missed it. Moreover, if he was just lost, why would he continue walking in a straight line for at least 6 kilometers? Why didn't his footprints show more signs of hesitation? Couldn't he have followed those footprints back to the radio noise room? After all, if the footprints were still clearly visible when the search team found them, he certainly could have seen them and followed them back. This leads to the question, was his deviation from the normal route intentional? Another explanation for Dish's disappearance is that he may have had a mental breakdown. There are rumors that just before he left, he was treated unfairly, or even cheated in a card game. He reportedly threw his cards onto the table and told his colleagues that he was going to the pole to visit a friend. There's a similar rumor that Dish was part of a 2-person team, and his colleague was an extremely boring person whose monotonous voice might knock a person insane over a long period. Given that some shifts in this job could be monotonous, it is not difficult to imagine the situation becoming worse after spending a long time with an unbearable and uninteresting person. Just like the card game example mentioned earlier, some people believe that Dish had simply had enough and left the building to clear his head. But by all accounts, given his experience, he should have known that such an act in such a harsh environment was tantamount to suicide, unless things had really spun out of control, and he had no intention of returning when he set out that morning. But then again, why would he commit suicide? While it is understandable that trivial matters might be magnified in such an isolated environment, it is difficult to understand why a man like Dish would react this way. After all, he was a successful young man with a promising future. In any case, the failure to find a body is a problem. Because if either of the two hypotheses above were true, at least some trace should have been found. Of course, unless he fell into a deep crevasse, which is entirely possible given that crevices are common in the Antarctic landscape. However, perhaps there are other reasons. Unsurprisingly, theories involving supernatural factors have also been proposed. Researchers have long debated why the footprints ended abruptly in the wilderness. Those skeptical of such claims insist that the remaining footprints were merely covered by fresh snow. In contrast, those more inclined to seek supernatural explanations argue that the footprints suddenly stopped, as if Dish had vanished into thin air, or had been lifted into the air. While the former explanation is more reasonable, according to several people involved in the search, abnormal bright lights were seen and strange noises were heard nearby around the time of Dish's disappearance. However, the source of this phenomenon has never been ascertained. Could he have been distracted by something when he walked out of the radio noise room and followed someone or something that caught his attention? Perhaps he saw the abnormal bright lights over the skiway and thought it was an unscheduled airdrop of supplies. But if that were the case, an unscheduled airdrop of supplies would be a big deal, and he would have certainly reported the situation before leaving. Moreover, we cannot find any official source reporting this strange phenomenon, which leads us to believe that these details may have been embellished over time. Another unusual aspect of this story is that a few days later, Dish's husky dog also disappeared. Some speculate it went to look for its owner, but this small detail was later connected to an even more bizarre explanation surrounding the case. It is said that in 1970-1, a message was transmitted to an Antarctic research center via the AA2 meteorological line. The sender claimed to be Karl Robert Dish himself, and the content read, "I am dead. They think my body is just a small dot, frozen on the surface of this white continent. I tell you, I am Dish, and I am alive. Don't think this is a mistake. Everything was planned. They tortured me, harassed me, bored me with their shallow lives." He also said he lured the dog away with canned oysters soaked in barbecue sauce, and spoke of the intense loneliness he felt at the moment. "The endless wind is driving me mad, and I am beginning to crave company." These words are indeed thought-provoking, but it would be almost impossible for anyone to survive for so long under such harsh conditions, especially with the scarcity of equipment he had at the time. Therefore, the message is generally considered to be a hoax. There is also a very rarely considered possibility that Dish might have defected to the Soviet Union, or at least been kidnapped by them. Although this sounds far-fetched, there is actually a story about a commander in the British Royal Navy who was part of an Antarctic survey team and disappeared under very similar circumstances during the 1960- Cuban Missile Crisis. It turned out that the man had been secretly working for the Soviet Union, and the Soviets whisked him away before his identity was exposed. After all, Dish disappeared at the height of the Cold War, and as an expert in his field, he was a valuable and attractive resource to both sides. This could also explain the strange lights and odd noises. However, the problem with this theory is the location of Byrd Station. It is about 600 kilometers from the nearest coastline. Crossing such a long distance during the Antarctic winter would be extremely difficult. So, unless his rescuers or kidnappers had a secret base nearby, this explanation is also unlikely. Despite all the theories, none seem to be rigorous enough to draw a definitive conclusion. What makes this case so intriguing is the minimal information available regarding the disappearance, coupled with the wide variety of possible explanations that have been proposed, even though none of them withstand close scrutiny. Given the existing evidence, it is highly likely that Karl Robert Dish committed suicide intentionally. The isolation, dealing with the same people day after day, the unbearable weather, and the oppressive lack of sunlight, all these factors combined may have pushed this young man to the brink of collapse. Antarctica is a strange place and has a peculiar effect on people. He would not be the first, and certainly not the last, to succumb to its dark gravity. Although his colleagues reported that he seemed to be in good spirits, the unfortunate truth is that some people are just too good at hiding their true feelings. Of course, we cannot be certain that this is what happened. As time goes by, the details seem to have become increasingly blurred, just like that string of footprints. Perhaps there is some poetry in that. This beautiful yet desolate continent certainly has a way of keeping its secret. May Karl Robert Dish rest in peace, wherever he may be.